You know, Animaniacs, I recognize that in my recent reviews, I've been consistently expressing my exasperation for what has become the traditional Hollywood animation formula. You know, CGI, color saturation, contemporary speech, celebrity-voiced crazy comedies in which 50% of the stories features two or more conflicting characters going on some wacky journey.
And I know that's not a perfect summary on why I've become so jaded with theatricals lately, because it's really not the formula's fault. It was set in place by Pixar and concreted by DreamWorks after all, so we know it can work, but it's the abundance of it. People were also getting tired of the Disney Renaissance formula after a while.
We have got your $7. Why should we try something new? We know you'll buy the video. Your money, we will rake it in.
But that was one decade of one studio with a few imitators every other year, not 7+ studios every year, some with multiple releases on what is now its third decade.
And it's especially irritating when the growing number of brand new animation companies have a chance to form their own unique identities, but just end up adding to the same old homogenized pile. Best proven formula for financial success, yes, I know. And the new Warner Group at least started with something seemingly fresh, even if it technically contained all of the same exact traits and was a play on literally the oldest movie plot in existence. Okay, so it's much more execution dependent, but even the execution has a pattern to it, which is make the movies really bloated formulaic versions of their trailers. Congratulations, animation has become the new horror. But here's the question on how it relates to Storks. Is it worth it if the story is unimaginative, the character arcs barely existent, and the flimsy world building if it's at least funny? And honestly, yeah, you can excuse a lot of flaws if the end result is entertaining for whatever reason, and thankfully, Storks is funny, at least a whole lot more funny than most other theatricals this year. So it's fun, but really not amazing, which is okay, but it is kind of frustrating because it's the sort of movie that could have been so much better if they had just put a little bit more creativity into the narrative. Because one of the reasons why the Hollywood animation formula is so irritating is when you have to have a comprehensive 3-act structure and the Pixar second act emotional struggle, it does mean that your story and characters have to matter for that moment of pathos to work. But then if you choose to have your primary focus be the animation and comedy, if your story and characters aren't going to be very good, the end product movie is going to inevitably be lacking in some way, even if your animation and comedy is on point. Because honestly, if I just want quick segments of physical cartoon wackiness, I'm better off seeing it in short, easily accessed form than trying to contrive it into a 3-act structure that I have to pay $10 for. Case in point, Storks is preceded by a Lego-style short, something I wouldn't be surprised and would even greatly support this company continue to do, which isn't necessarily funnier than Storks, but has a much more creative narrative. But whatever, let's talk about the movie already!
Now, I could question the merit of encouraging the age-old myth of babies coming from storks, but as almost every single young child comes in contact with a pregnant woman of some sort, and I don't believe kids are stupid, I can easily accept this as just a wacky storytelling setting. Plus, it's implied in-universe that storks are only one of several other ways to get babies, but that's never made crystal clear because, like I said, the world building here is kind of crap. Seriously, why do they just have a million old unanswered requests for babies just lying around? How are they not sued? Who knows and who cares? This pigeon guy talks funny. Anyway, fast-talking man-child business focus Andy Samberg teams up with misunderstood optimistic inventor number 5000, but holy crap, they got a real voice actor and not a celebrity, Izzy from Total Drama, go on a wacky adventure with a baby, where of course we have some very predictable baby-related hijinks, and there's a kid somewhere with workaholic parents, and yeah, story-wise, there's nothing particularly interesting about it. There's a few points toward the end where I do care about the white-bread human family, and I'll give it some extra points in that when it does its inevitable montage of parents receiving new babies, it does include both multiracial and same-sex parents. And yet this movie didn't call for a boycott. But as a comedy, it's a mixed bag depending on who you are, but hey, that's comedy for you. The animation is great at expression and quick physical comedy with a big emphasis on quick. This is yet another one of those animated films that feels like it's being played on fast forward, but at least it's not afraid of weird non sequiturs and not even trying to be remotely realistic, because seriously, this movie makes the penguins of Madagascar look practical. And your ability to enjoy this film is going to rely completely on how much you are willing to accept the silly. How silly are we talking about? Well, assuming you didn't see the transforming wolf submarine in the trailer, and I will give it that
While the trailer gives away a lot of its good jokes, it doesn't give away all the jokes. So yes, it narrowly avoids the Ruin Everything Club.
But the entire wacky journey hinges on Jake Peralta breaking his wing, so he needs to go with Orphan Tulip in her flying machine. How did he break his wing? Because he needed to press an emergency shutoff button that was conveniently located behind a pair of spinning saw blades. Because why not? Which of course only broke his wing instead of shredding it into a slushie. Also, because this is the age of honest trailers and cinema sins, that the movie fluxes into slightly meta territory by constantly pointing out its own contradictions, like why the baby machine is still here and not destroyed the minute it went out of production. Places where I found the comedy a little grating were the moments where, like in way too many animated films where they think that a lot of characters talking at the same time is comedy, naturally it has a handful of kitschy modern slang and references, and it has a large injection of new Ghostbusters disease in that what often starts as a funny joke, the movie keeps beating it until it dies. And this pigeon thing is honestly more annoying than funny, but because his comedy is mostly rooted in his weird awkwardness, someone will inevitably find him somewhat funny. And then of course, baby hijinks. That's just a cliche you're either on board with or not. But there's also plenty of comedy that works. I'm glad that it wasn't afraid to go for the weird and extreme with its silliness. The transforming wolves played by Key and Peele certainly stand out, but the really big comedic highlights for me are when Orphan Tulip pretends to be several different people at once when she's dealing with her loneliness, and the battle with the penguins where everyone has to fight but be super quiet about it to not wake the baby. So yeah, basically the movie is funny when you think it's funny and kind of a hodgepodge when it's not. And the only reason I make such a big deal out of the story is because if the story is good, you have something to enjoy even if the comedy doesn't work. There's just certain things I wish it could have been a bit more fleshed out, like Jasper playing a much bigger role, and Frasier's motivation could have been more involved than just what it was, and of course the pigeon having a point at all. But I guess because the story involved babies, the story needed to be thin so it didn't contain any accidental hot button allegories, but in general just better paced. You guys know I already have a thing about movies that tend to move too fast, and hyperactive is definitely one of the adjectives of Storks. But the speed is also what makes the animation impressive and the effective comedy work. And heck, compared to Secret Life of textbook definition of overrated, which is technically a better constructed movie with a more coherent story, but is so cliched and conventional that it is boring as tar. Granted, at least it's a shiny, medium quality tar, and not the crude, ugly, and also kind of smells bad tar. In contrast, Storks is nonsensical, but at least puts a lot more effort into being entertaining, if mindless. I have a feeling this movie will also probably get compared a lot to Emperor's New Groove, another animated comedy whose appeal really is about the humor, even with the familiar story. But I'd have to say that Emperor's New Groove can still be funny even when it's not moving 100 miles per hour, so I still basically prefer that. Also better made and the story flows more naturally and stuff. But I will say that the characters here are at least likable enough to root for, even if you get a little bit tired of their antics, and despite the ending being marred by a prolonged over-the-top destruction sequence completely out of pace with the rest of the movie's rapid speed, it does manage an emotionally resonant ending, but I would honestly knock that up to the theme of reuniting in family than the cohesiveness of the story.
So yes, I generally endorse this movie, but I also understand where the reviews are coming from. Its comedy is both conventional and predictable, but also very bizarre and effective, unlike its narrative, but depending on your mood, that's okay.
3.3 out of 5.
Talk to corporate, approve memos, lead a workshop, remember birthdays, direct workflow, my own